I gotta say, there we go. All right. Wait a minute. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Parent Power Hour. Just want to give a couple of seconds. We literally just went live, so like a couple of people run in and get on up in here. As you all come in, definitely please share the live. Prepare your questions and your comments. We are joined today by this amazing fella named and Jesse, if I mess up Hagopian, if I say it wrong,
just let me know. Said it right. You just said it right. Thank you.
All right. Awesome. Who is from the Zinn Education Project. And our topic today is the history and present day struggle for Black education. So we are going to get right into that because we are starting a little bit late and everything. So Jesse, so that we can jump right in and get the roll, and tell us about you and how you came to do the work that you do.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on the program, Tyrone, and excited to participate in this effort and support your communities in fighting for anti-racist, Black affirming curriculum. And I got started with this work out of undergrad. You know, I moved to Washington, D.C., and I started teaching in a 5th grade classroom. And I actually learned much more than I taught that year, for sure. You know, I would pass by the White House on my way to a school in Southeast DC in Anacostia. And then once you cross the river, you're in a whole different world. You know, people from DC know there's Washington, which is the halls of government, and then there's DC, which you know, was a chocolate city until all the gentrification has changed the complexion of the city. But you know, it definitely, I was in an area, one of the most impoverished areas in the country, that was segregated and, you know, neglected for far too long. And the impacts on the students I was teaching were intense. You know, the first research assignment I ever gave my kids, to research someone from history they admired that had helped create change in their community and their world. And they turned those projects in, and we were going to present them the next Monday. Well, we get to school on Monday and all the projects are destroyed because I found out there was a hole in the ceiling of my classroom and it rained into my room, and I had like a 1/2 inch standing water all over the floor, and the projects had been completely destroyed. And to me, that was a metaphor for the mistreatment and neglect of kids in the world's richest country, in the capital of that country, at the seat of power. My Black students were not a priority to this country, and it showed up on that day for sure, and many other ways. And so, you know, later, the next year teaching there, the city of DC announced that they were going to rescind our raises. We had negotiated raises in our contracts as educators, and they just said, well, actually there's not enough money, we're not gonna give you those raises anymore. And so I went to a union rally, and we were all rallying in front of the Capitol, in front of City Hall. And, you know, the usual like union leader speeches were occurring, but then the anger was so visceral from teachers who had been lied to, that teachers just spilled into the street and started blocking traffic. And then they opened up the gate to City Hall and marched inside and marched up to the mayor's office, and there was one of his aides scurried inside and locked the door real quick before we could get into his actual desk. but the teachers were in there chanting, no 9% October 1, no work October 2. No 9% October 1, no work October 2. And that threat of a strike brought about some quick change, because the following week they announced, oh, in fact, well, we found the money for your raise, and we'll be able to go through with that, right? And what I learned from my time teaching there was that I needed to transform the curriculum in my classroom to make it relevant to students who had been marginalized by an economic political system, because much of the scripted curriculum that they were telling me to use had nothing to do with the lives of my kids who were facing police brutality, not only in their neighborhoods, but in the school itself, with police officers jacking kids up against the wall, screaming in their face, and to help my students understand why their neighborhood was segregated and why it had been impoverished, right? I had to transform the curriculum, but it wasn't enough for me to just teach the kids about the problems and the history and tell them to do something about it. I had to take action myself outside of the classroom and be part of a social struggle for my own raise. But then, I learned quickly about the power of workers' solidarity and how we could be part of larger struggles to transform our economic system to make it more just. And so that foundation of what I learned in those few years from my fifth grade students and from that experience, I've tried to carry through in my life, moving back to Seattle where I'm teaching now, and using that to help organize a strike here in Seattle that we did. And some of the demands here was for racial equity teams in every school, for more recess, especially in Black and brown schools that had gotten rid of recess, so they could do lots more prep for standardized tests. And, we organized a boycott of standardized tests where teachers refused to give the MAP test because we saw how it was robbing our kids of a meaningful education. And, so ever since that experience, I've been trying to find ways to build at the intersections of racial justice and education.
Thank you so much. That is a lot. I hope folks were in. If you have questions, y'all definitely send them in and share the live. And Jesse, so you work with the Zinn Education Project. And could you share a bit about the Zinn Education Project for us, our listeners?
Oh, yeah, no doubt. The Zinn Education Project takes its name from the great historian Howard Zinn, whose book, The People's History of the United States, did something that few textbooks do, right? It really looked at history not from the position of the rich and powerful, but from the oppressed and exploited. And he analyzed wars not from the position of the politicians who declare those wars or the generals who order their troops into battle, but from the position of the people whose lives were lost, right? From the soldiers who had to fight and die in those wars, from the perspective of the countries who were being colonized and oppressed in those wars, right? Or he, wanted to analyze enslavement, not from the slave master's point of view, but from the people who were kidnapped, right? And taken from Africa, taken from their homelands, and forced to work, looking at the conditions of work in our economy, not from the positions of the owners and the bosses, but from the people doing the labor, right? And that's the tradition that the Zinn Education Project stands in, and how we try to organize our curriculum. And so it's, we've done some incredible work helping to bring that perspective to classrooms all over the country. So the Zinn Education Project promotes and supports the teaching of this people's history. And since 2008, Zinn Ed has introduced students to this more accurate and complex and engaging understanding of history. And we have now more than 140,000 educators who have registered at our website. So people can check out zinneducationproject.org and they can download lessons and articles organized by themes, right? By time period, by grade level. We're talking about interactive lessons on the civil rights movement or Native American resistance to colonization or police violence or voting rights or the Black Panther Party or climate change, women's rights, whatever social movement you can think of. We're trying to get articles and lesson plans to address it and to help teachers teach a people's history.
That is absolutely amazing. So what's the website for that Zinn Project, so that we can post it in the comments for our educators can check it out?
Oh yeah, Zinn Education Project.org.
ZinnEducationProject.org. Okay, we'll post that up and put that in the comments. And while we are doing that, could you describe an overview of the history of the struggle for Black education?
Absolutely. I think it's one of the most epic struggles. And I find it ironic that you hear today a lot of people talking about, why don't Black kids respect education? How come Black families, if they just, honored education the way white families are, then, they could really succeed in this country. And I will submit to you all today that I think that perhaps no people ever in the history of the world have valued education more and have struggled harder than Black people, right, for the right to learn. Beginning in 1740, the first laws in U.S. history were put on the books that made it illegal for Black people to be literate, right? And that's because in 1739 in South Carolina, the Stono Rebellion occurred. And this rebellion, of enslaved African people fighting for their liberation, was led by a group of enslaved people who marched with a banner that said liberty on it, right? And the enslavers in South Carolina knew that literacy was a tool, that word liberty, the fact that they could write that word and inspire others around it, and that literacy helped them organize their rebellion, was dangerous to the enslavers. And so the following year, they outlawed the right for Black people to be literate. And those anti-literacy laws spread all across the colonies and the American South, right? And the penalties for learning to read and write were severe. You could have a finger cut off. You could be whipped. And in some instances, Black people were killed for when it was discovered that they could read or write. And despite these penalties, Black people taught each other to read and write during the period of enslavement at great risk, but it shows you how much they valued education, right? And they did what was called stealing the meeting. And in stealing the meeting, Black people would sneak off, find a clandestine place to teach each other how to read and write, oftentimes late at night, right? So they'd be up all night learning to read and write and then have to get back in the fields and do their work, right? But that's how much they valued it. And so when the Civil War concluded, actually, when they began setting up schools in the South for the first time, they found that actually there were already Black people in the South who were literate, who could begin teaching schools right away because they had secretly taught themselves to read and write. And they, it was Black people who invented public education in the South. It didn't exist. Even for poor white people couldn't send their kids to public schools during the period of enslavement. And so when Black people founded public schools in the South during Reconstruction, right, it also ended up benefiting white communities as well. But that was a huge threat to the former slave owners in the plantation class, they saw literate Black people as a threat to their economic dominance. And so, they founded the KKK. One of the biggest aspects of the KKK's work was burning down Black schools, and they burnt down over 600 Black schools during Reconstruction, following the Civil War. And the immense violence that was visited on Black people for trying to receive an education didn't stop them, though. They kept rebuilding schools and fighting for their education. And it's an incredible story, right? And then you have the civil rights movement, where the Brown versus Board of Education decision is one of the things that sparks the civil rights movement, right? Again, the struggle for education helps to spark a larger uprising of Black people for their rights. And Black people organized freedom schools and citizenship schools. Incredible educators like Septima Clark knew that there was no liberation without education. And, she refused to separate her activism from education. And they threatened if she didn't leave the NAACP, she'd be fired. So she took that, was fired, but began to organize community schools, citizenship schools, and then the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee did an incredible freedom schools in their 1964 Freedom Summer campaign to help people learn how to register to vote, and much more, right? And today the struggle continues with the fight for police-free schools that's going on right now, the Black Lives Matter at School movement, right? So this is the epic struggle for Black education.
Absolutely. Thank you. This is a wealth of knowledge. So folks who have joined us and who are sitting here watching, taking it in, I hope you have your notepads and your pens available. Definitely share the live with others, also you all in your network, so that people can get this wealth of knowledge. Again, I had to personally thank you, Brother Jesse, for being here, sharing this information. I'm taking it a lot and learning it a lot, and I love when we have guests on that can educate all of us about some things. Right on. We have a lot of questions, John. We started a little late and we had to end on time, so I want to really try to get through these. But as part of the Zinn Project, we know you are working on a project about Reconstruction. Can you talk more about this era and what it meant for Black education?
No doubt. Yeah, we have released a report recently called Erasing the Black Freedom Struggle: How State Standards Fail to Teach Truth About Reconstruction. And this is really an incredible report. It's the first comprehensive study of all state standards on Reconstruction. And, and it found that states have established education standards that overwhelmingly ignore the role of white supremacy in ending Reconstruction. And a lot of these state standards really reproduce racist and false framings of Reconstruction that obscure the contributions of Black people to Reconstruction's achievements. And so, for example, it's only Massachusetts is the only state in the country that mentions white supremacy and its direct link to the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, the passage of Black codes and Jim Crow laws, and to the defeat of the promise of Reconstruction. And then you have examples like in Georgia, where they instruct teachers to, quote, compare and contrast the goals and outcomes of the Freedmen's Bureau and the Ku Klux Klan. They're basically creating a dangerous and false moral equivalency between these two organizations, as if you could, the Klan and the Freedmen's Bureau are like equals that we're going to compare now and discuss. So wow. It boggles the minds. And in many states, Reconstruction only appears on just a list of themes that can be discussed for a particular time span. And so like in Maine, Reconstruction isn't even listed as one of the things that you should teach about. Incredible erasure that's going on. And what's so tragic about this is that Reconstruction is just a breathtaking time period that every student just has to know about to understand our own society today, to make sense of what they're seeing in the news, to make sense of their own identities, right? You got to understand this time period, but it's often completely left out of the education, or it's really mistaught, because Reconstruction was an era of unprecedented change when Black people organized to fulfill freedom's promise, right? And the accomplishments of the formerly enslaved really can just fill volumes. This is a time when the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments were passed that banned enslavement, with, of course, the notable exception of if you were imprisoned for a crime, right? Then it created birthright citizenship. So everyone born in the US was a citizen. So not only was slavery abolished, but now Black people were citizens and had the rights of citizens, and 15th Amendment guaranteeing your right to vote, at least for Black men, because women still didn't have the right to vote, right? And so beyond that, right, the establishment of the public school system, incredible advancement. And, you know, all these different civic societies, incredible advancements for politically for Black people, where more than 1,500 Black Americans were elected to office in this time. You know, for Black people who had been enslaved just a little bit ago, to now actually having 16 Black Americans serve in Congress, right? Who some of whom had formerly been enslaved. Just breathtaking time period. And you can't understand the potential of struggles for anti-racism unless you know that, right? And when we talk about institutional racism today and how to fight it, you have to see examples of institutional anti-racism that were taken at that time to know about the potential. And unfortunately, so many states are robbing youth of this vital time period.
Yeah, without a doubt. I want to thank you for breaking down some of those things. I think some folks may not have known what Reconstruction was, but you definitely started to go into details to explain that for us and get that going for us. That's good. Could you talk about your work to correct misinformation in curriculum and pedagogy?
Yeah. So I think that history we talked about is so important, because our struggles today for a liberatory curriculum are in the context of all of those struggles of our ancestors, right?
Okay.
And, you know, my ancestors were enslaved on plantations in Mississippi and in Louisiana, and they were forbidden to be able to read and write. And so I'll be damned if I'm going to allow people today to forbid my students and my own children to learn how to read the world, as Paulo Freire put it, right? And that's what I think a lot of the attack on anti-racist education is about. Is, okay, today's racists aren't so bold as to ban the teaching of the written word, but they do want to ban the teaching of the world and of how to make sense of society and where power lies, and right, and how to organize to change systems of power. They don't want any of that in the classroom, but instead of saying we're racist and we want to maintain the power structures that exist today, right? They say you're hurting white kids' feelings by teaching about the way that race and racism have functioned in our society, and nothing could be further from the truth. This isn't about shaming white children in our class. We want to empower white children to learn the tradition of anti-racist white people throughout history who joined the struggles for social justice, and have them be proud of that tradition and to consciously join that, right?
Yep.
And in fact, to me, I feel like the people who deny structural racism, they actually end up leading kids to feel shame and confusion, because when kids aren't dumb, they know that there is great inequalities in our society. They go to segregated schools, right? They see that mostly the advanced placement classes are white kids, and the quote general ed classes are black kids. They see police violence in their community. They know that there's inequalities. And when white kids see those things, they can either think of those things as their fault for being white, or they can understand that there's structural racism, right? That there's systems of oppression that exist, and they can choose to support those systems, or they can choose to organize against them. And that's what we want. That's what we want to do. And that's what I've tried to dedicate my life to, helping organize multiracial classrooms to figure out how they can be on the right side of justice and the right side of that history.
Mm-hmm. And oh gosh, I just want to say so much, but I want to get through these questions because of the time. I want to get into so much. I will definitely say I think that is the fear, though. The more it is put out there and actually taught, I mean, although we do see some, white Americans, they grasp on and they get the, they like you said, they're not dumb. They know what's going on. They see, but to actually teach it and get it in the schools, it would just make things move a little quicker. So they don't want that to happen. That's the thing. But anyway, could you talk a bit about the attack on critical race theory in the context of this history? Excuse me.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just picking up where I left off, I mean, the attack on critical race theory is intense today, right? Because the Republican Party has decided that that is going to be one of its major strategies for regaining Congress and the White House. And so, the three-pronged strategy that the Republican Party has for re-election is to attack voting rights, make it harder for Black people and people of color to vote, right? Which, again, you have to understand Reconstruction to understand that, because Reconstruction is where Black people won the right to vote. And we had to fight and win it again in the 60s with the Voting Rights Act, because it wasn't properly enforced, of course. But they want to attack our voting rights. They want to attack transgender kids by saying, attacking their right to exist or to play sports, and using that as a wedge issue to excite their base. And then they want to attack critical race theory, which they have defined as anything that exposes racism, right? And so any kind of anti-racist teaching, they have labeled critical race theory and attacked. And unfortunately, I think a lot of liberals' response to the attack on critical race theory has been to yell, "Oh no, we don't do that. We don't teach critical race theory. The Republicans are lying that there's no critical race theory anywhere, except for in graduate classes." And it's true that it's in graduate law schools where critical race theory is actually a course, right? And it's also true that most educators had never heard the term critical race theory until Republicans raised the issue, right? But that being said, educators do use elements of critical race theory. And when they do, that's a good thing, right? And we should encourage more use of critical race. Instead of saying, no, we don't do that, we should say, well, if we're not doing it, we should do more of it, right?
Okay.
Critical race theory has a few important observations that we need to understand. First off, it says that race is a social construction. And what that means is that it rejects the white supremacist eugenics definition of race that it's biological, and understands that race was invented by white supremacists in order to divide and conquer and oppress, right? And critical race theory also has a claim that advancements for racial justice are met with white supremacist backlash. And the irony, of course, is that the attack on critical race theory is proving the central tenet of critical race theory, that when you make advancements for racial justice, like the 2020 uprising, that you will face white supremacist backlash. And that's what these laws banning the teaching of critical race theory are about, right? And it's now in over 30 states, I believe, that have introduced legislation trying to ban the teaching of the truth about structural racism and sexism in our society. And it's having a chilling effect to where even in states where the laws haven't passed, teachers are afraid to use books by, like, say James Baldwin, or different Black authors that they are worried bring up themes that could anger parents who are scared by critical race theory. So this is a really scary time, and we have the potential to sink into an era that looks very much more like the McCarthy era, where teachers who were labeled communists were fired by the thousands across this country, over 400 in New York City alone in the 40s, right? And so a teacher in Florida got fired for having a Black Lives Matter flag in her classroom. A teacher in Tennessee was fired for teaching about white privilege and having the kids read an essay by Ta-Nehisi Coates, right? Teachers in my home state of Washington have been threatened, physical threats against their well-being for signing the Zinn Education Project pledge to teach the truth about structural racism. So the struggle is real.
Yeah.
And we need everybody to get involved and to join the movement to defend anti-racist teaching of all kinds, including critical race theory.
Mm-hmm. The struggle is real, and to know. So I've been out of school, y'all, for a while now, but this has been going on for a while. And when you mentioned it, it just brought it back to my memory. I had a library teacher. So back when I was in school, library, that was one of your subjects. You had to go and you had to be in, and so our librarian wanted us to do a report on James Baldwin. Okay. And she was really adamant about it and really wanted us to like really dig into it and everything. And she was like our favorite. Not only was she beautiful, y'all, so that was part why she was our favorite, but she was also just like young, down to earth, and she was really into making sure that we as little Black kids knew about our history and where, all of that stuff like that. And it was like one day she was there, and then the next day she was gone. And the day that she was there and then gone, the very next day was the day that all of her different classes, she put out this thing about James Baldwin, the report. We had a relationship, and she had a relationship with my mom, because I had did some things at a college with her, all this stuff like that. And we found out that was the reason why they had fired her, because she went against the curriculum. And I'm like, so this has been, and I've been out of school for a long time. I was in elementary school when that happened. So we're talking well over 25, 30. I'm not going to tell you how much, but long time ago.
That's such a good point, because this isn't the first attack, right, on anti-racist teaching. This has been happening.
Yep. This has been happening. So let me ask you, how can educators be a part of correcting misinformation and fighting the attack on CRT?
Yeah, that's the critical question right now. And I would say a couple things. One is to continue the struggle in your own classroom. Go to the Zinn Education Project and get those people's history lessons, those anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic lessons, anti-imperialist lessons. and go to Rethinking Schools. You know, I'm an editor with Rethinking Schools magazine, and we are a quarterly magazine. You can get a subscription to the magazine that has the latest from social justice teachers all over the country who write for it, who share their lessons and teaching activities that are really hitting and making a difference. And you can be part of that community, that intellectual community, and you can share your own lessons, write up your own ideas of what's working, right? So the work you do in the classroom is critical, but we know that you're going to face attacks for teaching the truth about history, you know, and because of that, we're going to need to organize a struggle with students, parents, teachers, educators of all kinds, union members, community members, activists, organizers, coming together to say education has to be one of the foremost struggles that we engage in. The Republican Party has made it their number one priority, and if we don't make it our number one priority, they're going to use that issue to further a white supremacist right-wing agenda. And so join the Teach Truth movement, right? You can, on the Zinn Education Project website, we have a petition to teach truth. And we have over 8,000 people who have signed it so far who say they are going to teach truth in their classroom. And they're going to refuse to lie to kids about structural racism, whatever these laws say. Right. And we have a quote from Martin Luther King about how it's morally right to disobey unjust laws. Right. And that's the tradition that we have to invoke in this struggle. So sign that Teach Truth petition and join the struggle. And one of the most important struggles today, too, is the Black Lives Matter at School movement, you know. And this is an incredible uprising of educators, students, and parent allies across the country. It started with an action in Seattle in 2016 that I helped to support at that went from an elementary school to a citywide action of educators wearing Black Lives Matter shirts. And then the incredible teachers in Philadelphia saw the Black Lives Matter at School day of action in Seattle, and they took it to be a whole week, turned it into a week of action. And then and helped to make it national. And ever since, there's been a week of action the first week of February is Black Lives Matter at School week. And then we turned it into a year of purpose. So now every month there's different events and themes that you can organize around in the struggle for Black education. So go to blacklivesmatteratschool.com and learn more about that as well.
Definitely. Thank you. Parents, as a parent, and then, you know, us educators, and this is definitely, I know I can't speak for every city or state or whatever, but I know here in Baltimore, with speaking with educators and speaking with folks, we have a lot of educators who be nervous and really scared about doing things that they know is right because it jeopardizes their jobs and put them in the line of fire and all that stuff. But I would like to say, and I would also like to hear from you, Jesse, on what parents can do to support this movement. But parents, from a parent's perspective and an advocate, this is when we do step up and be. They can't fire us, you know what I mean? They can't jeopardize our jobs or do anything like this. So this is when it's time for us to join together and join this movement, because if we have educators who's willing to put their jobs at risk to teach our kids the truth, we need to support them wholeheartedly. Like, they should not feel like they are in this alone, or they don't have the support of the parents in the communities. We should be organizing other parents and other community members for them. But definitely, Jesse, you as well, is there any other pointers, anything that you could say that parents could do to help support this movement?
Yeah, no doubt. No, that's such a good point. In order to get truth in the classrooms, parents are going to have to help create a environment where teachers feel like they are going to be safe if they teach the truth. And so raising your voice as a parent is critical right now. And there's lots of ways to do that. But organizing a Teach Truth group in your school, in your city, right? Going to PTA meetings and circulating the Zinn Education Project petition and finding out if there's other teachers that are other parents there that want to help support. Going to school board meetings, opposing the banning of books that are going on all across the country. They're trying to return us to that McCarthy era, right? They banned the book Robin Hood during the McCarthy era because they thought it had communist themes, right? And as absurd as that sounds, it's happening right again before our eyes, right? And so going and getting Black authors and queer authors to come and read books at your for your kid's school, and defending the right of incredible authors like Jason Reynolds, and others who have seen their books banned. I think it is really important to testify at school board meetings to say we need ethnic studies programs. Not only do we want to stop the ban of critical race theory, but we want to actually replace the whitewashed curriculum that has been the standard for far too long in our schools. We want to replace that with ethnic studies programs and Black studies programs. And we need parents to join in educators in that struggle.
No doubt, no doubt. Jesse, thank you for being here today and educating us. And I know you had a very tight schedule, so we appreciate you, filling in and doing it. I think we, without a doubt, have to at some point do some type of part 2 to this, to just kind of like check in, let our folks know what's going on or how they can support or be. And if there's ever any updates, any information we can put out, please send it to us. Let us know so that we can put it out there to our parents and our educators. We're connected to a lot of parents and educators, so any way we could do anything that we could do on our end. You've given me a lot to think about, and some other things to now put on my plate, because now I gotta organize and teach the truth group here in Baltimore.
Oh man, I gave you some homework, huh?
Yeah, you gave me homework. You gave me work to do, and I'm like, I wasn't there, but hey, that's great. That's good. I appreciate it. We get ready to come into the summer. I mean, there's already so much going on, and I know it's a hard time with COVID for educators and parents. But listen, like, this is real. I mean, this had to happen, and if we want our school systems to remain and actually give our kids what they need. Because I can have a whole conversation about the curriculum and how 80% of the crap they teach our kids ain't going to actually help them in life. You know what I mean? So if we want the truth to it, we have to get behind them and support this. Anything you would like to say before we go, Jesse?
Hey, I just want to thank you for having me on. I appreciate the conversation, and I'll be happy to join you all again for a part 2 whenever you have availability. And folks can continue the conversation by following the Zinn Education Project on Twitter or Instagram. Same with Rethinking Schools. People can hit me up at Jesse D Hagopian on Twitter. And happy to continue the conversation and then support people struggling for teaching the truth about Black history in this country. So and lastly, the book Teaching for Black Lives is a resource I would offer folks. I helped to edit that book, and has a great way to begin implementing these lessons in the classroom.
Teaching for Black Lives. Amazing. Awesome. So we will do, and that'll be our first kind of way to start that parents and educators for the summer. That's going to be our book. We're going to start a book club. That'll be our first book.
Oh, no.
That we're going to do right there. Thank y'all for joining us, y'all. We're here Thursday night at Tyrone's house for Parent Chat. And then, of course, we're back here on next Monday for Parent Power Hour. Thank you again, Jesse, and everyone who's joined and commented and showed love and shared the post and all that good stuff. Do it. This was very a great information was shared with us on here and educated. So folks who are here, please do a watch party on your own Facebook Lives and stuff like that. We will post this on YouTube to get this out there to more people. Y'all have a great evening. Thank you.